She was only 9 years old, sick with cancer, carrying an oxygen machine on her flight. But when the airplane captain got very sick and everyone was in danger, little Phoenix used what she knew about flying to help save 127 people. And F-22 fighter jets flew beside her plane to honor the bravest little girl they'd ever seen. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun cast long shadows across Denver International Airport on Tuesday, March 15, 2024, as 9-year-old Sofia Martinez wheeled her small pink suitcase through the bustling terminal. Her bald head was covered by a colorful knitted cap her grandmother had made, decorated with tiny airplanes that seemed to dance as she walked. The portable oxygen concentrator hummed quietly beside her, its rhythmic breathing matching her own careful steps. Her mother, Elena, walked close behind, one hand protectively hovering near her daughter's shoulder while the other gripped their boarding passes for United Flight 1247 to Washington, D.C. Sofia had earned a very special name during her 2-year battle with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The nurses at Children's Hospital Colorado had started calling her Phoenix after she'd bounced back from 3 separate relapses, each time rising stronger than before. The nickname had spread throughout the hospital, then to the Make-A-Wish Foundation volunteers, and eventually to the Air Force families who visited the pediatric ward. Major Tom Harrison, whose own daughter had been treated in the same unit, had been so moved by Sofia's courage that he'd arranged for her to receive an honorary call sign through the 1st Fighter Wing at Joint Base Langley Eustis. It was unprecedented, a civilian child receiving military recognition, but Phoenix's story had touched hearts across the entire aviation community. The bond between Sofia and Major Harrison had begun during one of her longest hospital stays, when his daughter Emma was receiving treatment in the bed next to hers. While Emma struggled with her own medical challenges, she and Sofia had formed an instant friendship. Major Harrison, spending countless hours at his daughter's bedside, began sharing aviation stories to distract both girls from their treatments. He taught them about aircraft systems, radio procedures, and the brotherhood of military aviators. When Emma passed away 6 months later, Major Harrison continued visiting Sofia, finding in her resilience and curiosity a living tribute to his daughter's memory. Through Major Harrison's patient instruction, Sofia had absorbed aviation knowledge like a sponge. During chemotherapy sessions that lasted hours, she would study aircraft manuals and flight procedures. She learned to identify aircraft by their silhouettes, memorized emergency checklists, and practiced radio communications until her speech patterns matched those of seasoned pilots. The medical staff had initially been amused by her dedication, but they soon realized that aviation had become more than a hobby for Sofia. It was her lifeline to a future beyond cancer. Today's flight to Washington, D.C. was part of her Make-A-Wish trip to visit the Smithsonian and meet with Air Force leadership who wanted to honor her personally. The ceremony had been planned for months, with F-22 demonstration flights and a formal presentation of her Phoenix patch. Elena watched her daughter's excited face as they approached their gate, marveling at how this tiny warrior had inspired so many people. Sofia carried a worn notebook filled with aviation terms and radio procedures that Major Harrison had taught her during their hospital visits. She'd memorized emergency protocols, aircraft specifications, and communication standards with the same determination she'd shown in fighting her illness. The notebook was more than just a collection of facts. It was Sofia's connection to a world where courage and precision mattered, where protocols existed to handle any emergency, and where teamwork could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Each page contained meticulous notes written in her careful handwriting, diagrams of aircraft systems, and emergency procedures that most commercial pilots would recognize immediately. Major Harrison had ensured that every entry was accurate and current, believing that knowledge was the best gift he could give to honor both his daughter's memory and Sofia's future. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom, and Sofia practically bounced with excitement despite the oxygen tube in her nose. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh immediately recognized the small passenger from the crew briefing. The captain had informed the entire crew about their special passenger, Phoenix, and her inspiring story. Jennifer knelt down to Sofia's level as they boarded, her voice warm and welcoming. "Welcome aboard, Phoenix. We're honored to have such a brave co-pilot flying with us today." Sofia's eyes lit up at being called by her call sign, and she showed Jennifer her notebook filled with aviation knowledge. "Look, Miss Jennifer," Sofia said, opening to a page covered with approach procedures. "Major Harrison taught me how pilots land when the weather is bad. See, you have to follow the ILS approach, and if you can't see the runway at minimums, you have to execute a missed approach and try again. Safety is always the most important thing." Jennifer examined the detailed notes with amazement, realizing that this child possessed aviation knowledge that exceeded many passengers she'd encountered in 15 years of flying. Captain Michael Rodriguez had been flying commercial aircraft for 15 years, but he'd never been more excited about a passenger manifest. When he'd read Phoenix's story in the crew notes, he'd immediately decided to invite her to visit the cockpit before takeoff. As the passengers settled in, he made his way back to row 12 where Sophia sat by the window, her small face pressed against the glass watching the ground crew prepare the aircraft. "Phoenix," he said, using her call sign with the respect it deserved, "would you like to see where the magic happens?" Sophia's oxygen concentrator rolled beside them as they walked to the cockpit, Elena following closely with tears in her eyes. First Officer Sarah Chen had prepared a special chair for their young visitor, and as Sophia settled in she immediately began identifying instruments and controls, impressing both pilots with her knowledge. "That's the primary flight display," she said, pointing to the main screen. "And that's the navigation display. Oh, and that red button is the fire suppression system. You only use that in real emergencies." Her casual expertise left both pilots speechless. Captain Rodriguez handed her a pair of aviation headphones. "These are yours to keep, Phoenix. Every great pilot needs their own set." Sophia put them on carefully, adjusting them over her knitted cap, and for a moment she looked like any other pilot preparing for flight. "Thank you, Captain Rodriguez," she said formally. "I'll treasure these always. Major Harrison says proper communication is the foundation of safe flight operations." The captain smiled at her professional terminology, recognizing that this child had been taught by someone who truly understood aviation. As they returned to their seats, Sophia couldn't stop talking about the cockpit instruments. She explained to her mother how the altimeter worked, what the different warning lights meant, and how pilots communicated with air traffic control. Other passengers began listening to the young girl's enthusiastic explanations, amazed by her depth of knowledge. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman across the aisle, leaned over and said, "You know so much about flying, sweetheart. Are you going to be a pilot when you grow up?" Sophia's response was immediate and confident. "I'm already Phoenix. I just need to learn how to make the plane go up." The interaction with other passengers revealed the depth of Sophia's impact beyond her medical journey. A businessman from first class, overhearing her explanations, came back to introduce himself. "I'm a retired Air Force colonel," he said. "I've heard about you from friends at Langley. Your call sign is known throughout the fighter community." Sophia's eyes widened with excitement as Colonel James Mitchell shared stories of his own flying experiences, creating an impromptu aviation discussion that drew passengers from throughout the cabin. "The thing about call signs," Colonel Mitchell explained to the gathering crowd, "is that they're earned through actions not given lightly. Phoenix here has earned hers through courage that puts most adults to shame. In the military we have a saying, courage is not the absence of fear but action in spite of fear. Phoenix embodies that completely." Sophia blushed at the praise but stood a little straighter, understanding that her call sign carried responsibility as well as honor. The aircraft pushed back from the gate right on schedule, and Sophia pressed her face to the window to watch the ground crew's coordinated ballet. She narrated the pre-flight procedures to her mother, pointing out the baggage handlers, fuel trucks, and marshalling signals with the expertise of someone far beyond her years. As they taxied toward the runway, she opened her notebook and began following along with the standard departure checklist, whispering the items to herself like a prayer. "Engine start check. Navigation systems check. Flight controls check," she murmured, following along with procedures that Captain Rodriguez was performing in the cockpit. Elena watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement, recognizing that aviation had become more than an interest. It was Sophia's way of finding order and control in a world where cancer had tried to steal both from her. Flight 1247 lifted off smoothly into the Colorado morning sky, and Sophia watched the world shrink below them with wonder that never seemed to fade despite her many hospital transport flights. This was different though. This wasn't a medical transport or an emergency flight. This was her victory flight, her celebration of survival, her journey to receive honors that no 9-year-old had ever received before. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand as they climbed through the clouds, both of them thinking about how far they'd come from those dark days in the ICU when survival had seemed impossible. As they reached cruising altitude, Sophia began sharing her aviation knowledge with nearby passengers, turning the flight into an impromptu educational experience. She explained how aircraft systems worked, described different types of clouds they were flying through, and even demonstrated proper radio communication techniques. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon half the cabin was engaged in discussions about aviation, weather, and the physics of flight. At cruising altitude, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom with the usual flight information, but he added something special at the end. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special passenger with us today. Sofia Martinez, known by her call sign Phoenix, is traveling to Washington, D.C. to receive honors from the United States Air Force for her courage and inspiration. Phoenix has been fighting and winning battles that would challenge the bravest soldiers, and she's done it with a smile and a determination that has inspired everyone who's met her. Phoenix, this flight is dedicated to you." The entire cabin erupted in applause, and Sophia turned bright red but smiled widely. Passengers began approaching her seat to shake her hand, share their own stories of overcoming challenges, and thank her for showing them what real courage looked like. A businessman from first class brought her a small model airplane from his briefcase. "I collect these from every flight," he said. "But I want you to have this one. It's from my first flight as a cancer survivor 5 years ago." An off-duty nurse from the back of the plane came forward to check on her oxygen levels and adjust her equipment, tears streaming down her face as she worked. The atmosphere in the cabin had become something special, a sense of community centered around this remarkable young girl who had turned her own struggle into inspiration for others. Passengers were sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity, creating connections that wouldn't have existed without Sophia's presence. She had become not just a passenger, but a catalyst for human connection and hope. 2 hours into the flight, as they crossed over Kansas, Sophia was showing a group of children her aviation notebook when a sharp alarm sounded from the cockpit. The seatbelt sign illuminated immediately, followed by Captain Rodriguez's strained voice over the intercom. "Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately. We're experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit." The professional calm in his voice couldn't hide the underlying tension, and experienced travelers immediately recognized something was seriously wrong. Jennifer Walsh rushed toward the cockpit, her training kicking in as she prepared for whatever crisis awaited. What she found made her blood run cold. Captain Rodriguez was slumped forward in his seat, unconscious, while First Officer Chin struggled to maintain control of the aircraft with one hand while trying to revive him with the other. The captain's face was gray, his breathing shallow and irregular. It was clearly a severe medical event, possibly a heart attack or stroke. "I need help up here," Sarah called out, her voice steady but urgent. "And see if there are any medical personnel on board." The call for medical assistance went out over the intercom, and thankfully a cardiologist from Denver General was on board. Dr. Patricia Williams rushed to the cockpit and immediately began assessing Captain Rodriguez's condition while First Officer Chin focused on flying the plane. "He's had a major cardiac event," Dr. Williams announced grimly. "He needs immediate medical attention on the ground. How quickly can we land?" Sarah's response was not what anyone wanted to hear. "We're over rural Kansas. The nearest suitable airport is Kansas City, but that's still 40 minutes away, and we're dealing with weather systems that are complicating our approach options." The medical emergency had transformed the atmosphere in the cabin from celebration to crisis. Jennifer Walsh, despite her years of training, found herself facing a situation that pushed beyond standard procedures. With the captain incapacitated and First Officer Chin struggling to manage single-pilot operations in increasingly challenging conditions, the flight crew needed every resource available. What none of them initially realized was that their greatest asset was sitting in row 12, calmly reviewing emergency procedures in her worn notebook. In the cabin, passengers could sense the gravity of the situation even without knowing the details. Sophia watched the flight attendants' faces carefully, reading the controlled panic in their expressions with the same analytical skills she developed watching medical teams during her treatment. She turned to her mother and whispered, "Mama, something's really wrong. The captain is sick, isn't he?" Elena nodded, pulling her daughter closer. "But we're going to be okay, Mija. The co-pilot knows what to do." Sophia opened her notebook and began reviewing emergency procedures, her mind already working through possibilities. The situation in the cockpit was deteriorating rapidly. Captain Rodriguez remained unconscious despite Dr. Williams' efforts, and First Officer Chen was discovering that flying the aircraft alone while coordinating an emergency landing was more challenging than any simulator training had prepared her for. The weather system approaching Kansas City was bringing strong crosswinds and reduced visibility, conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilot. She declared a medical emergency with air traffic control, requesting priority handling and emergency medical services on the ground. United 1247, Kansas City approach. We have you on radar and we're clearing a direct route for immediate landing. Be advised, weather is deteriorating rapidly with winds gusting to 40 knots and visibility dropping below minimums. Emergency crews are standing by. The radio crackled with the professional calm of controllers who dealt with emergencies regularly, but Sarah could hear the underlying concern in their voices. She was a competent first officer, but landing a fully loaded commercial airliner in severe weather conditions while dealing with an incapacitated captain was beyond her normal experience level. The complexity of single-pilot operations in an emergency became apparent immediately. Sarah needed to fly the aircraft, communicate with air traffic control, coordinate with the cabin crew, manage fuel consumption, review approach procedures and monitor weather conditions simultaneously. Each task demanded attention that pulled focus from the others, creating a dangerous cycle of divided attention at the worst possible moment. As the aircraft began its descent toward Kansas City, Sophia made a decision that would change everything. She unbuckled her seatbelt and, despite her mother's protests, walked toward the front of the cabin where Jennifer was coordinating with the cockpit. "Miss Jennifer," Sophia said, her voice small but determined, "I know about aviation emergencies. I can help." Jennifer looked down at the tiny girl with her oxygen concentrator and initially dismissed the offer. "Sweetheart, the pilots have everything under control. Please go back to your seat." But Sophia persisted, opening her notebook to pages covered with emergency procedures and radio protocols. "I know the emergency checklist. I know how to communicate with air traffic control. First Officer Chin is trying to do everything alone, but Captain Rodriguez taught me that emergency procedures require two people for safety. I can be her second set of eyes." Jennifer looked at the detailed notes, the careful diagrams, and the obvious depth of knowledge this 9-year-old possessed. Against all protocol and common sense, she made a decision that would either be brilliant or disastrous. The notebook that Sophia carried contained more than casual aviation knowledge. Major Harrison had ensured that every procedure was current, every checklist accurate, and every communication protocol properly documented. He taught her not just what to say but when to say it, how to prioritize information during emergencies, and the critical importance of clear, calm communication when lives were at stake. What Jennifer saw in those pages was professional-level aviation knowledge adapted for a child's understanding but maintaining complete technical accuracy. "Wait here," Jennifer told Sophia, then rushed to the cockpit to speak with Sarah. "I know this sounds crazy, but we have a passenger who might be able to help. She's just a child, but she has extensive aviation knowledge and knows emergency procedures. She wants to assist with communications or checklists." Sarah looked up from her instruments, sweat beading on her forehead as she fought to maintain control in increasingly difficult conditions. "Are you insane? I can't have a child in my cockpit during an emergency." But as another strong gust rocked the aircraft and Sarah struggled to manage all the required tasks simultaneously, Jennifer pressed further. "Her call sign is Phoenix. She's the one this flight was dedicated to. She's been studying aviation for 2 years with an Air Force major. She knows the procedures, Sarah. She knows them cold." Something in Jennifer's voice, combined with the desperate circumstances, made Sarah reconsider. "Bring her up, but she follows my instructions exactly, and if anything goes wrong, she goes back to her seat immediately." The decision to allow a child into the cockpit during an emergency violated every protocol Sarah had ever learned. But desperate situations sometimes demanded desperate measures, and if this child truly possessed the knowledge Jennifer claimed, an extra set of trained eyes and hands might make the difference between a successful landing and disaster. Sarah's training had emphasized crew resource management, using every available resource to ensure flight safety. In this moment, that resource happened to be a 9-year-old cancer survivor with an extraordinary education in aviation procedures. Sophia entered the cockpit with her notebook clutched tightly in her small hands, her oxygen concentrator humming beside her as Elena reluctantly followed. The sight of Captain Rodriguez unconscious in his seat was jarring, but Sophia had seen worse during her hospital stays. She'd watched people fight for their lives and learned that sometimes the best way to help was to focus on what needed to be done rather than being overwhelmed by the situation. "First Officer Chin," she said, using proper radio protocol. "Phoenix reporting for duty." Sarah looked down at this tiny girl and saw something in her eyes that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with flying in the first place. It was the same determination, the same refusal to give up that had carried Sophia through cancer and countless setbacks. "Okay, Phoenix. I need you to handle radio communications with approach control while I focus on flying. Can you do that?" Sophia nodded seriously, accepting the headset that Sarah offered her. Her small hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady as she keyed the microphone. Kansas City approach, United 1247, this is Phoenix assisting with communications. Captain is incapacitated with medical emergency. First Officer Chin is pilot in command. Requesting weather update and approach options. The professional tone and correct terminology coming from obviously a child's voice caused a moment of silence from air traffic control. Finally, the controller responded, United 1247, confirm Phoenix is assisting with communications? Sophia's response was clear and confident. Affirmative, Kansas City. Phoenix is trained in emergency procedures and assisting crew with non-flying tasks. The air traffic controller, veteran Jim Morrison with 23 years of experience, had never encountered anything like this situation. A child was handling emergency communications with the professionalism of a seasoned pilot, using correct terminology and procedures that many adult passengers couldn't manage. He immediately alerted his supervisor while maintaining professional support for United 1247, recognizing that regardless of who was speaking, the aircraft was in genuine distress and needed every possible assistance. What happened next would become legendary in aviation circles. As word spread through the Kansas City TRACON that a child was helping coordinate an emergency landing, controllers began alerting military facilities in the area. The 442nd Fighter Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base picked up the radio chatter, and when they heard the call sign Phoenix, associated with a child helping with an aviation emergency, alarms began going off throughout the base. Major Harrison had briefed multiple units about Sophia's story, and her call sign was known throughout the fighter community. The story of Phoenix had spread through military aviation channels not just because of her medical journey, but because of what she represented to the warrior community. Here was a child who faced death daily and responded not with despair but with determination to master skills that might save lives. Fighter pilots, who understood better than anyone the relationship between knowledge, courage, and survival, had embraced Phoenix as one of their own. Her honorary call sign carried real weight in the community, representing values that defined military aviation culture. Within minutes, 2 F-22 Raptors were scrambling from Whiteman Air Force Base, their pilots having volunteered for an unofficial escort mission. Kansas City approach, Raptor 1 and Raptor 2 requesting permission to provide escort for United 1247. We're familiar with Phoenix's story and want to render honors. The unusual request caused confusion until Phoenix's voice came over the radio again. Kansas City approach, Phoenix copies Raptor flights. Thank you for the escort. It would be an honor. Major Kyle Viper Thompson and Captain Lisa Falcon Rodriguez, the F-22 pilots, had both heard Phoenix's story through Major Harrison's briefings. They understood that this wasn't just any child helping with an emergency. This was Phoenix, whose call sign represented courage earned through battles that would challenge any warrior. Their decision to escort her flight was immediate and unanimous, representing the military aviation community's recognition of one of their own in crisis. As the F-22s took position on either side of Flight 1247, their pilots could see the large commercial airliner struggling in the deteriorating weather conditions. United 1247 Raptor 1. Phoenix, we've heard your story from Major Harrison at Langley. The entire fighter community is proud of you. We're going to stay with you all the way to the ground. Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she responded, Raptor 1 Phoenix copies. Thank you for being here. It means everything. The presence of the F-22 escort transformed the emergency from an isolated crisis to a mission supported by the entire military aviation community. The fighter pilots maintained constant communication, providing weather reports, visual confirmation of the airliner's condition, and most importantly, the psychological support that comes from knowing you're not alone in a crisis. Their professional respect for Phoenix elevated her from a child helping in an emergency to a fellow aviator deserving of military honors. The approach to Kansas City was becoming more challenging by the minute. Crosswinds were gusting over 40 knots, visibility was dropping rapidly, and the runway was wet from the approaching storm system. Sarah was fighting to keep the aircraft stable while managing multiple emergency checklists. Sophia proved invaluable, handling all radio communications with air traffic control, reading checklists aloud, and even monitoring engine parameters that Sarah couldn't watch while hand-flying the approach. Phoenix, I need you to call out our altitude every 100 feet below 1,000, Sarah said, recognizing that this child was functioning better under pressure than some experienced pilots she'd flown with. Affirmative, Sophia responded. Currently 900 feet on glide path, airspeed is good. Her voice remained steady even as the aircraft shook violently in the turbulence. She continued her callouts professionally, 800 feet, still on glide path. 700 feet, slight drift to the left. The precision of Sophia's callouts reflected Major Harrison's meticulous training. He had taught her that in aviation emergencies, accurate information delivered clearly could mean the difference between life and death. Every callout was timed precisely, every observation relevant to the pilot's needs. She wasn't just reading instruments, she was providing the kind of real-time situational awareness that professional crews develop through years of experience. The F-22 pilots maintained their escort positions despite the challenging weather, their own aircraft being tossed around by the same turbulence that was making the airliner's approach so difficult. United 1247 Raptor 2. You're looking good from our position. Phoenix, your professionalism is outstanding. You're making the Air Force proud. Sophia's response came between altitude callouts. Thank you Raptor 2. 600 feet, back on centerline. As they descended through 500 feet, disaster nearly struck. A severe wind gust caught the aircraft and pushed it significantly off the approach path. Sarah fought the controls, but for a moment it appeared they might have to execute a missed approach and try again. That's when Sophia's voice cut through the chaos with information that would prove crucial. First Officer Chin, wind is shifting from the southwest. I can see the windsock from here. The gust is passing. Her observation, combined with Sarah's quick reactions, allowed them to get back on approach path. The ability to read environmental conditions and communicate them effectively had been one of Major Harrison's most important lessons. He had taught Sophia that pilots needed to be aware not just of their instruments but of the world around their aircraft. Her observation of the windsock and wind patterns demonstrated that she truly understood aviation as a complete system, not just a collection of procedures. 400 feet on glide path, looking good. Sophia continued her callouts while simultaneously coordinating with ground emergency services through air traffic control. Kansas City approach, Phoenix requesting that ambulance services meet us at the gate. Captain Rodriguez needs immediate cardiac care. The calm professionalism in her voice was remarkable for someone so young, and controllers later said they forgot they were talking to a 9-year-old child. 300 feet, runway in sight, conditions holding steady. Sophia's callouts were now rapid-fire as they approached touchdown. Sarah was completely focused on the landing, her hands steady on the controls despite the stress of the situation. 200 feet, looking perfect. 100 feet, flare looks good. The aircraft touched down smoothly despite the challenging conditions, and Sophia's voice carried pure relief as she made her final callout. United 1247 is down safely. Excellent job, First Officer Chin. The moment of touchdown represented more than just a successful emergency landing. It was validation of everything Major Harrison had taught Sophia about aviation, proof that knowledge and courage could overcome seemingly impossible odds, and confirmation that the call sign Phoenix had been earned through actions that would define her for the rest of her life. The F-22 pilots performed a ceremonial flyover as the airliner rolled out on the runway, their formation tight and precise despite the weather conditions. Phoenix, Raptor 1 and Raptor 2 rendering honors. You showed more courage and professionalism today than many veteran pilots. The call sign Phoenix has never been more appropriate. As the aircraft came to a stop, emergency vehicles surrounded it immediately, medical personnel rushing aboard to care for Captain Rodriguez. Dr. Williams had managed to stabilize the captain during the approach, and he was quickly transported to the University of Kansas Medical Center where cardiac surgeons were standing by. First Officer Chin finally allowed herself to show emotion as she realized the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished. She turned to Sophia and said, "Phoenix, I couldn't have done that without you. You saved this aircraft and everyone on it." The passengers, who had been largely unaware of the drama playing out in the cockpit, began to understand the severity of their situation as they saw the emergency response. When they learned that 9-year-old Sophia had been helping coordinate their emergency landing, the entire cabin fell silent in amazement. Then, spontaneously, someone began clapping. The applause spread throughout the aircraft until every passenger and crew member was giving Phoenix a standing ovation. News of the emergency landing spread quickly through aviation and military communities. Major Harrison was contacted immediately and arranged to fly to Kansas City to personally escort Sophia to Washington, D.C. for her postponed ceremony. The story of Phoenix helping coordinate her own flight's emergency landing captured international attention, with major news networks requesting interviews and aviation organizations offering recognition. The aviation community's response was unprecedented. Pilot organizations, aircraft manufacturers, and military units worldwide sent messages of support and recognition. Phoenix had become more than just a brave child with cancer. She had become a symbol of what was possible when knowledge, courage, and determination combined in the face of seemingly impossible odds. But for Sofia, the most meaningful moment came when Captain Rodriguez, now stable and recovering from successful cardiac surgery, was able to speak with her from his hospital bed. "Phoenix," he said, his voice weak but grateful, "you exemplified everything that call sign represents today. You rose from the ashes of a crisis and helped save everyone on that aircraft. I'm honored to have flown with you." Sofia's response was simple and profound. "That's what Phoenix does, Captain. We never give up and we help each other fly." The ceremony in Washington, D.C. was expanded to include recognition for Sofia's actions during the emergency. The Secretary of the Air Force personally presented her with wings worn by combat pilots, making her an honorary member of the United States Air Force. F-22 pilots from multiple squadrons attended the ceremony, saluting as Sofia received her Phoenix patch officially. The citation read, "For extraordinary courage under pressure and exceptional airmanship skills displayed during a flight emergency, resulting in the safe landing of 127 passengers and crew." Elena watched her daughter receive honors typically reserved for military heroes and realized that Phoenix had always been destined for greatness. Not because of her illness, not because of her survival, but because of who she was at her core. A person who rose to meet challenges with courage, knowledge, and an unwavering determination to help others. The call sign Phoenix had never been more perfectly suited to anyone. Years later, when Sofia Martinez became the youngest person ever accepted to the Air Force Academy, she would carry the same worn notebook that had helped save Flight 1247. Her story became required reading in aviation safety courses, not just because of what she accomplished but because of what she represented. The idea that heroes come in all sizes, that courage isn't the absence of fear but action despite it, and that sometimes the smallest voice can make the biggest difference. The F-22 pilots who escorted her that day would tell their grandchildren about Phoenix, the 9-year-old cancer survivor whose call sign became a symbol of hope throughout the Air Force. They would speak of her calm professionalism, her unwavering courage, and her refusal to be defined by her circumstances. But most of all, they would remember her response when asked why she'd volunteered to help during such a dangerous situation. "That's what Phoenix does. We rise up and we help others fly." On Tuesday, March 15, 2024, a little girl with cancer became a legend. Not because she was sick, not because she survived, but because when the moment came to choose between fear and courage, between staying safe and helping others, Phoenix chose to fly. And in doing so, she reminded everyone who heard her story that heroes aren't born. They're forged in the moments when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. The Phoenix had risen, and she had carried everyone with her. In the years that followed, whenever young pilots felt overwhelmed by the challenges of aviation, instructors would tell them about Phoenix, the 9-year-old girl who proved that with knowledge, courage, and determination, anyone could learn to fly, and more importantly, anyone could help others soar. Her story became more than just an inspiring tale of a child overcoming adversity. It became a testament to the power of preparation, the importance of never giving up, and the incredible things that become possible when someone chooses courage over comfort. Phoenix had shown the world that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry weapons. Sometimes they carry oxygen concentrators and worn notebooks filled with the knowledge that saves lives. The call sign Phoenix would forever be associated not just with mythical rebirth, but with a real child who rose from the challenges of cancer to lift an entire aircraft full of people to safety. In choosing to help when she could have stayed safe, in bringing her knowledge to bear when others needed it most, and in remaining calm when chaos threatened, Sofia Martinez had proven that the greatest flights aren't always about reaching destinations. Sometimes they're about ensuring everyone makes it home.